Thank you, Kendra. I am redeemed. Well, we're going to talk about being redeemed today. In preaching class, they tell you don't use poems in a sermon. People don't like poetry. And if they do like it, they like to read it and think about it, get the lines where they're supposed to be and the images. But I'm going to break that rule today and start with a poem. It's written by the Pulitzer Prize-winning American poet Mary Oliver. It's short. It does not rhyme. I'm sorry. Here's what Mary Oliver wrote in her poem, I Wake Close to Morning. She says, why do people keep asking to see God's identity papers when the darkness opening into morning is more than enough? Certainly, any God might turn away in disgust. Think of the Queen of Sheba approaching the kingdom of Solomon. Do you think she had to ask, is this the place? Why do we keep asking for God's identity papers when all of creation bears witness to a loving, creative, powerful, majestic, beautiful God? Do you think when the Queen of Sheba went to visit Solomon in all of his splendor and grandeur, she had to pull up to the palace and say, am I in the right place? Is this where he lives? No. But why do we go into this majestic world full of splendor and continue to wonder, is there a loving God? Is God here? Well, the answer to that is because life gets tough. Can we get an amen to that? Life gets tough. And it hits us when we're not looking, and then we begin to wonder about this world. Assume for a minute that something happens to you, something major, something unpleasant, something is lost to you. Let's think in those terms. Something precious, something irreplaceable, something essential to your life. And it's lost to you due to no fault of your own. You weren't involved in criminal behavior. You weren't doing some kind of sinful activity. You weren't inattentive. You weren't you weren't doing anything wrong. You're just sort of minding your own business, going through life, and a big loss comes your way. And you can't figure out why. Maybe somebody dies that you're close to, or maybe a marriage ends and you don't understand exactly why, or maybe you lose a job or have a financial calamity. Maybe you have trouble in the family. Maybe you get sick. What do you think goes in your mind when something like that you didn't cause, you didn't deserve, it happens to you anyway? On any level, does it make you wonder, well, where is God? Or what's God up to? Is God available? Is God responsible? Is God accountable? Is God reliable? Is God credible? Is God capable? Is God, period. That's not a rhetorical question, is it? No, it's not a rhetorical question because every one of us has had some loss. This is not something that's hypothetical, it's something that's real. Every one of us has had things taken from us that were precious to us, irreplaceable to us, essential to us. And we wonder, why did that happen to me? We wonder, where is God in that? In 1906, Atlanta had a huge riot around race. And the great African-American scholar and civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois was down in rural Alabama whenever he heard about it. And he was terrified because people were killing, dozens of African-Americans were killed in the streets of Atlanta. And he wanted to get home because his wife and his daughter were home alone. And so he caught a train and he went back to Atlanta as fast as he could. And he sat on the front porch with a gun laying across his lap to protect them from anybody who might have been trying to kill them because they hated folks with their skin color. On the way to Atlanta, as he was on the train, and later Du Bois said, I might have been a little too angry to write a poem, but on the way there, he wrote something called the Litany of Atlanta, and I want you to hear what he said. He said, bewildered we are, O God, and passion-tossed. mad with the madness of a mobbed and mocked and murdered people, straining at the armpost of thy throne, O God. We raise our shackled hands and charge thee, God, by the bones of our stolen fathers, by the tears of our dead mothers, by the very blood of thy crucified Christ. What does this mean, O God? Tell us your plan. Give us a sign. You see what he's asking for? He's asking for God's identity papers. Where are you in this? If this is your plan, tell us more about it, because it doesn't make any sense to me. Where are you, God, in all of this? That's a tough situation. We read here about Job. And Job never doubted the existence of God. He just doubted the goodness and the purpose of God, because he had major losses. In about 3 days, he lost everything. He lost his livestock and his livelihood. He lost his home. He lost his wealth. He lost all of his family, and he lost his own health. He had nothing, and he was broken down. And we read, I want to read again this, where he was when he got to kind of the bottom of his despair. He says, nobody is paying any attention to me. I don't get any love anywhere. So my servants, they don't respect me. The house guests that I've taken in and given hospitality to, they're rude. They don't want anything to do with me. My wife can't stand even the breath of me. Some of you have that problem. She don't want me around. She don't want to see me. And he said, even children, they look at me and despise me. My life is just ruined. It's just collapsed on me. Where are you, God? Why did you leave me in this setting? This is Job looking for God's identity papers. This is Job in the pit of despair. Now, one of the reasons that Job is in the Bible, the book of Job is in the Bible, is to help us understand that all evil comes from all sorts of forces, that Job had no control over what was happening to him, and we don't have control over a lot that happens to us. But it's not to be blamed on God. Job teaches us, well, I should say it this way, Job thought everything came from God, that everything that happened, God did. And so if there was a tornado, God did it. If there was a fire, God did it. If somebody got sick, God did it. It was all on God. And one of the reasons we have Job in the Hebrew Scriptures is to tell us, no, God didn't do that. God created a cosmos in which evil exists, and in which evil is permitted to do its dirty work. We've seen that from time to time. But it's not God didn't cause it. And Job was struggling with that. But even if we move past God did this to me, then we get to that question, well, if God didn't do it, who did? And the first person we usually look at is ourselves. What did I do to create this catastrophe? Now, again, Job is trying to battle that thought, because Job, we're told in the very beginning, Job was a righteous man. He wasn't a sinful, crook, lousy individual. He was a good man. Now, maybe he had some problems. If you look earlier in this passage, he says, God stripped my glory from me and removed the crown from my head. Well, you could ask the question, Job, why did you think you deserved glory? And why did you think you deserved a crown on your head? He may have a little bit of ego problem. Maybe he needed to be humbled a little bit. That would make some sense. Herbie Cohen is a master negotiator. He was involved in helping President Carter with the Iranian hostage crisis way back then. He was involved with President Reagan, helping him with to deal with Gorbachev. He also helped settle a Major League Baseball strike and a strike with the NFL. He's been around. He's done a lot of things. But he writes in his little book called The Adventures of Herbie Cohen that was published a few months ago, he says, I learned something as a boy that changed my life and made me who I am today. All right, he tells the story that when he was in the 8th grade, Herbie Cohen ran around with they didn't call it a gang, they called it a club. Any of you ever a member of a club? They had their own jackets. Leather jackets, and they were cool. And they had this little club in the Jewish section of Brooklyn, New York. And they ran with 5 or 6 boys, and they all kind of hung together. One of those young men was Larry King. That Larry King, the broadcaster. Another one of the young guys in that group of 5 was Sandy Koufax, the Hall of Fame Jewish pitcher for the Dodgers. And so they're traveling together, and on the first day of the 8th grade, they go to Mappo's house to pick up Mappo, another one of their gang, and to go to school in the 8th grade. But Mappo's not there. His cousin's sitting on the front porch, and his cousin says, Mappo's got tuberculosis. And his parents have taken him to Arizona where they're going to give him treatment for 5 or 6 months, see if they can get him well. He won't be around. And so the boys say, well, we'll tell the principal and we'll tell the teachers, we'll get it clear at school. They go, well, thank you. But on the way to school, Herbie had a different idea. He said, we could, guys. Now, just hear me out on this. We could go in there and tell them Mappo's dead, and that we're collecting a memorial offering for Mappo to put a wreath on his grave. He said, I bet you we'd get some cash. We could do anything we wanted to with it. And the guys agreed. Sandy Koufax agreed to that. Can you believe that? Larry King was in on that. And so they go into the school, and it works, man. The faculty's putting in money. The kids are putting in money. The administration's crying, poor Mappo. And they gather this money, and they go to Coney Island and spend every dime of it. And nothing more is said about Mappo until May. In May, they're called into the principal's office, and they're said, boys, we're going to start a new award. We're going to name it after Mappo. And every year, we're going to give that award to students who show unusual compassion for other students. And guess what, guys? This year, it's going to you. We've invited your parents. We've invited a reporter from the New York Times. This is going to be a brand new event. We want you to get your suit on and be here. And rather than come clean, the boys said, well, we got to ride this out. So they dressed up in their suits. They went up on the stage. They took their place. There was a huge banner about the award over their heads. Their parents were there, filled with pride, and just before the principal gave them the award, you know what's going to happen, don't you? Mappo walks into the auditorium. Their parents are really embarrassed. The principal is furious. He expels them from school and then says, and you're expelled from high school as well. Now they eventually got a little more lenient sentence. But Herbie Cohen says he learned on that day, you be truthful the rest of your life. You tell the truth. And he says it's the best negotiating ploy he's ever had. Nobody tells the truth in negotiation. He just tells the truth. He was humbled that day. And maybe Job needed to be humbled, but Job hasn't done anything that's commiserate with what's happened to him. Don't you agree with that? I mean, even if he was a little arrogant, he didn't deserve this. Anytime bad things happen to us, we can go back over our lives and we can identify some missteps along the way. If our health crashes, then we remember, people have been telling me to have fewer cocktails and cut out the cigarettes and don't eat so much fried food and go to bed earlier and have less stress and get some exercise. I didn't do all that. Woe is me. I brought this on. When you have children that have problems in life, all parents look back and remember at times when we lost our temper, or we were inattentive, or we're just too tired to put up with them. And we have that, this is probably what caused that. If a marriage breaks up, you can remember a lot of times when you had an argument or kind words were left unsaid, or little acts of unfaithfulness, eroded all of that. If you have financial problems, you can remember that time you spent money you shouldn't have spent, and maybe you invested in something that was a little bit weak, or maybe you never did save. Your dad told you when you were 21, if you put away $30 out of every paycheck, by the time you're my age, you're going to have enough money to buy the world. And you said, no. We can always look back and see mistakes that we've made, but brothers and sisters, they are not commiserate or justifiable to the major losses of our life. There's nothing between them. Surely we could have lived better lives, but we didn't cause all this. Job didn't cause all this. It just came on him, crashing down on him. And he tried to figure out, where is God? What is God? Is there God? And it's a stance that we can identify with from time to time. Where are you, God? In the middle of our despair. Despair is caused when we cannot find any correlation to the pain in our life and any behavior that we have done, when we cannot find any recourse to the losses in our life, any way to recapture them, when all losses are final, come into us, and we cannot get away from it, then there is great, great despair. And we wonder, where is God? Last week on one day, I was told about a 15-year-old girl that has a huge mass growing on her brain. I was told about an 18-year-old boy who had to jump from a burning apartment. He hit the ground and is fully paralyzed at this moment. I was told about a young woman whose life has been turned upside down by cancer, a mother. I was told about a man that went to see his mother, and she no longer even knows who he is. Now, those things are not things I read in the newspaper. They're not things I saw on the nightly news. Those are things that people told me because they needed pastoral care. And that was just one day. These things happen, and they crush us. And we wonder, what are we going to do in them? And we struggle with them, and we go into the pit of despair, just like Job is in the pit of despair. But look at this. Something happens. Cheryl was reading along, and she was just rocking and rolling. And then there was this little gap in the passage. I don't know if you were reading with her. Just a space, maybe a couple of lines, between verse 22 and verse 23. He's saying, everybody hates me, nobody likes me, I got nothing going on in my life. And then he pauses, maybe takes a breath, and then he says in verse 23, oh, that these words were written down. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. One commentator says, oh, I wish these things were etched in stone, so that future generations could read what I'm about to tell you. I'm about to tell you something important here. I would like to have it engraved in a rock forever. And then verse 25, he says, for this I know, and man, that I know is not even strong enough in any of the translations. He says, this is something I know for certain. My Redeemer liveth. Hope comes into his despair. We don't know where, we don't know how, we don't even know why. He's sitting there about ready to give up on everything, and out of some place of grace comes the word of hope. Gerald May, in his highly influential book, Addictions and Grace, says you can work with somebody that's got an addiction for years, and they'll just keep going back and doing the same stuff over and over again. And then he starts telling stories about this guy who was an alcoholic for 25 years, and they tried everything and nothing had worked. And he just walking down the street one day, turns a corner and says, you know what? I don't think I'm ever going to drink again. And he doesn't. And nobody knows why. What do we do? Let's replicate that. No, they don't know. Just grace came on him. Tells a story about a guy that was a smoker, and he'd done hypnotism and a patch and gone to all these things. He wanted to quit, and his wife wanted to quit, and he tried. And then one day he just wakes up and says, you know, I'm through with these. And he throws them into a garbage bin and never smokes another cigarette. Over and over, Gerald May tells these stories of people who seem to be hopeless in their addiction, and yet out of some great act of God, grace comes upon them, and it changes them from the inside out. Again, you can't control it, you can't force it, you can't make it happen, he says, but it still happens by the grace of God. That's what I see here in this text. Job is in despair, nothing's going right, and then out of God's grace comes this word of hope. And he says, I'll tell you this much. I would like to write it down so everybody who ever hears about me will know this. And here we are reading this 4,000 years after it was written. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the end he will stand beside me on this earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God. And I shall see God on my side. It will be my eyes that behold, and no one else's. Oh, my heart skips a beat when I think about it. Remember when your heart skipped a beat? You two right there looking at each other. Yep, right. Charles is there. You guys are probably still skipping beats just looking at each other. You know, when you see somebody and your heart skips a beat, it's such a nice feeling. If it's not a heart attack, that's a different thing. But if it just skips a beat, it's good. There's a couple back there. They're still skipping beats. I can see there. Yeah, okay. He's saying, man, when I think of this, my heart is so full of joy, it skips a beat. Redeemer. In the Jewish society, the Redeemer was your relative who came to help you when you could not help yourself. If somebody died, especially the breadwinner in the family died, the Redeemer kinsman came in and took on the family. Family, move in with me, I'll take care of it. If the person's murdered, the Redeemer kinsman gets justice in some very clear ways, goes after the perpetrator and gets justice. If it's a sickness of somebody main in the family, the Redeemer kinsman comes in and takes on all the responsibilities of that person. If it's financial loss, the Redeemer kinsman comes in and pays the debt. Even if the person in debt had to sell himself into indentured servanthood to get out of debt, the Redeemer kinsman comes in and buys his contract and gets him out of that and releases him. The Redeemer kinsman is the person that shows up when you can't handle things yourself and helps you. And the Redeemer kinsman never says, I did anything to cause this. It's not my fault. It's not saying, oh, I feel bad because I did something wrong. No. It has no culpability at all. It's just motivated by compassion and grace and comes in and helps and does for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Job says, I'll tell you this much. I don't know how I got in this jam. I've never gotten an apology or an explanation. Here I am calling out to God, but I'll tell you this much. You who make fun of me, you who criticize me, you who say there is no God, I know my Redeemer lives and will stand with me. Stand by my side. Stand up for me. This week, one of my friends said, Pastor, I've lost my ID. And I have money in a bank, but I have no picture ID to show them. So would you go with me to the bank and stand there with me and say, yep, he's the guy, so they'll give me my money? And I said, yeah, okay. I said, that's not going to work, but let's go try it. So I drove him over, and he's an eccentric guy like most of you. And he just kind of yells out stuff, and you never know what he's going to say. And so I'm always a little nervous with him. But he yells at the manager, hey, manager, come on, are you the manager? And she goes, yeah. And he tells her, this guy knows who I am. Will you give him my money? And she says, well, just show me your picture ID. Well, he doesn't have one. And I said, but he really is this guy. And she said, yeah, that anybody could come in here and tell me that. I've got to see a picture ID. He says, I told you I don't have it. I need the money for my rent, for my food, for my transportation. I don't have it. I said, he really is. I'll vouch for him. She said, that don't matter. I said, you may have a picture on file. She says, he's got to have a picture ID before I can give him his money. I could get in huge trouble for doing it any other way. And I thought, oh gosh. And he looked at me and said, this is hopeless. That's the exact words. This is hopeless. And then he looked over behind the teller window and he saw this man. And he said, that man knows me. That teller knows me. He used to be in the drive-thru. I didn't have a car, but I'd walk through the drive-thru, and he would give me my money. He knows me. He knows me. And praise be to God, that guy looked up, and he said, well, hello, mister, and he named the man. And the manager said, okay, if you know him, give him his money. That's a Redeemer kinsman right there. When everything is lost, somebody steps in and says, I will stand beside you. I will vouch for you. I will redeem you. Wasn't me, it was the teller. We believe our Redeemer stands in the person of Jesus Christ, and that Christ comes to us When we have done things, or when life just gets so messy and messed up, we don't know what to do with ourselves, Christ comes to us to stand with us, to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves, to be God's identity papers for us. And when we call out to Christ and say, oh, forgive me, oh, strengthen me, oh, help me, oh, reveal God to me, precious Lord, Christ, our Redeemer, stands with us here and in the world to come. Thanks be to God for our Redeemer, Jesus Christ. For every one of us now can say with Job, I know that my Redeemer liveth, and will one day stand beside me. And when my flesh is gone, I shall see God with my own eyes. My heart skips a beat at the thought of it all. May God bring you hope in the middle of your despair, as only God can do.